Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel. Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for an album ranking video for you guys. Now, for this ranking, I'll be ranking the studio albums from the legendary industrial metal band Fear Factory. Fear Factory is, in my opinion, one of the best metal bands that ever came out in the 90s, and I think they're a solid band, and they've never released a bad album in my opinion. Now, obviously, some albums are better than others. Of course, you'll find out which is my least favorite and which one's my favorite, according to this ranking, of course. Now, keep in mind, I don't own all the Fear Factory albums, but I'll still talk about those for this ranking, of course. So, like with all the other rankings, we're going to go from my least favorite to my favorite, worst to best, of course, based on my opinion. So at the bottom, as my least favorite, I got to go with their album, Transgression, which I know a lot of people would have at the bottom of their Fear Factory rankings, and for understandable reasons. It's just not as musically interesting as their other albums. There are some highlights here, though, like the title track, which is probably the best song on the album, in my opinion. I also do like Supernova. That's a pretty cool song. It's more on the melodic side. It's a bit different, but I do like it, though. And then we got one of the worst Fear Factory songs, I Will Follow. I mean, ever since I heard this song, it's kind of cringy, to be honest. Now, it's not the worst thing that I've ever heard in metal or in music or anything. It's not unlistenable or anything. It's just a bit cringe and just, I don't know. Doesn't really do a whole lot for me. Kind of unoriginal, whatever you want to say about it, of course. But yeah, even though this album does have some of their weakest material, there is some pretty strong stuff on this album. So, Transgression. Now, next up, we actually have one of the Fear Factory albums I don't own. It's from their modern day time, and that is their album Genexis. The reason that this album is kind of low for me is because it's just not as memorable as the other albums from their modern era. I think it's a very strong album, don't get me wrong. I think it's very good, you know. I dig the production on this album. I mean, you could even argue this is one of the best produced Fear Factory albums, but I like it, but I don't love it, though. That's basically my opinion on this album. So, Genexis. So, next, we actually have the other Fear Factory album I don't own, and that is Mechanize. Of course, their comeback album, and it's a pretty solid album, I must say. Again, the production, pretty good. I mean, of course, you can't talk about this album without talking about the song Final Exit, which I think is a really great track and definitely one of the best, if not the best song on the album. It's just a really standout track, I think. But yeah, Mechanize, it's a good album. So yeah, I would eventually like to get these two Fear Factory albums that I don't own yet on CD at some point, of course. They're the only ones that I'm missing, so of course at some point I'd like to get them. But let's go ahead and move on to what's next. So next we got the Industrialist, which I know some people would probably have a lot lower than I do. I can understand why, but I don't know. I actually really dig this album. Some of my favorites on the album would have to be the Industrialist, Recharger, New Messiah, Disassemble. I mean, really great songs, real heavy stuff too. So yeah, I know some people might complain that the album is just kind of more of the same, but I dig the album, and it was actually one of my introductions to Fear Factory, which is maybe why this album ranks a little bit higher for me than some people, but I really dig this album. You could say it's, you know, a bit underrated, but I don't know. I think it is one of the better albums of their modern time, actually. So, The Industrialist, I think it's a very strong album. So next, we got their debut album, Soul of a New Machine. This is definitely a really great album. A bit death metal influenced, which I know that there's some people that are not Fear Factory fans that like this album due to the influence, you know, because it's a lot heavier, of course. But there is a lot of really great tracks on this album, of course, like Martyr and Scapegoat. Those are really great songs. But yeah, very strong album. Yeah, maybe not their best, and yeah, maybe not the best produced Fear Factory album, maybe not the album with the best production of their discography, but you know what? Good production doesn't always mean anything. Sometimes albums can be, or you know, have the production that this has and still be very solid. I think this is a really solid album, actually. So, Soul of a New Machine. Next up, we got their latest album, Aggression Continuum, which is unfortunately also the last album with Burton C. Bell. And to me, this is actually the best of their modern era. I remember being very excited for this album when the album was coming out and everything. Really, I don't think you can go wrong with any of the songs on the album, but some of my favorites would have to be Recode, Disruptor, the title track, and Collapse. Purity and End of Line, those are pretty cool songs as well, but yeah, Aggression Continuum, really good production and everything. You could argue that this album is kind of just more of the same as well, but you know, Fear Factory is a pretty consistent band, and that's something that I do got to give them credit for. So Aggression Continuum, very solid album, and it is of course one of my favorite albums of 2021. If you haven't seen my end of the year list, definitely go check that out if you haven't already. So yeah, definitely a strong album. Next, we got one of their most underrated albums, and that being Archetype. But yeah, this is a very strong album. It's very heavy, it's raw, and I mean, about everything on this album is very solid, but some of my favorites on here would have to be Slave Labor, Cyber Waste, Drones, and the title track. But yeah, very strong album right here. So if you like your metal real heavy and real raw, definitely check out this album. This album basically offers all of that. It's probably one of their heaviest albums as well. So here we are at the top three. Now, number 3, I think, is probably their most overhated album, and another album that I might say is underrated. I guess that depends on who you ask, of course. I know some people say that this is one of their favorites, and yeah, it's one of my personal favorites from the band. And I am, of course, talking about Digimortal. And I know that some people complain that this album is too nu metal influenced, but it's not something that really bothers me that much. I think there's some very strong tracks on this album. I mean, the first 6 or so songs are excellent. What Will Become, Damaged, Digimortal, No One, Linchpin, which is one of their classics, and Invisible Wounds, which is maybe one of my favorite Fear Factory songs, to be honest. I just love how different and moody and dark this song sounds. Yeah, a bit different, but, you know, it's pretty good. I really dig this one, and again, it's probably one of my favorite songs from Fear Factory. So, Digimortal, definitely a great album. So here we are at number 2. At number 2, now this album, I know a lot of people would have it number 1, but for me it's only number 2. I think it's a very strong album, easily one of their best, and I am of course talking about The Manufacture. And everything about this album is pretty much excellent. This album basically defines their sound. This is what I would say is a good introduction to Fear Factory. It was not my first Fear Factory album, but I do think this would be a very good introduction if you're looking to check out the band. I mean, the first half of this album is especially very strong, of course with songs like the title track, Zero Signal, Replica. There's a lot of really great stuff on this album. I mean, real heavy stuff, and yeah, probably another one of their heaviest albums. And I mean, this album kind of just has it all, you know? But this is only my second favorite, of course, but nonetheless, I think most fans can agree that this is one of their best. So number 1 for me would have to be their album Obsolete, which is a bit more straightforward than Demanufacture. You know, maybe not as heavy, maybe has more melody. But, you know, whatever you want to say about it, this is currently my favorite Fear Factory album. Now, of course, that could change, you know, maybe within a year, Demanufacture might be my favorite, but for as long as I've been a Fear Factory fan, which has not been very long, this album here has kind of remained as my favorite, to be honest. This, to me, has some of my favorite songs, some of their best songs, of course, like Shock, Edge Crusher, Descent, Freedom or Fire. That's a really great song, probably another one of my favorite songs from Fear Factory. And of course, Resurrection's a pretty cool song as well. But yeah, Obsolete. I mean, in my opinion, this just has some of their best work. Now, again, some people might say that this one pales in comparison to Demanufacture, but even though that's the case, that's opinion that I can respect for sure. But this, to me, is my personal favorite. So, Obsolete, that's what's my #1 favorite album from Fear Factory. So there you have it. That is my ranking for the band Fear Factory. Let me know what you guys think. Are you a fan of this band? Feel free to let me know, and how would you rank this band's discography? So with that being said, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day, and take care.